Air India Express flight. 812 is on its final approach to runway 24 at Mangalore Airport. The plane is unstable. It's flying in at a dangerous 9-degree angle and with excessive speed. At the end of the runway is a 200-foot cliff. The runway is short, and there is no margin for error. But at this speed, they won't be able to stop, and they might fall into the cliff. "Go around, Captain. Please go around." But the captain doesn't respond. The clock is ticking. They need to go around now, but they don't. The plane continues hurtling towards the runway. What happens next? Let's find out. This is the story of Air India Express 812. Wings, it's 10 p.m. at Dubai International Airport. Air India Express Flight 812 is being prepared for its next flight. Passengers are boarding, luggage is being loaded, the plane is being refueled. In the cockpit, the captain and the first officer settle into their seats. It's supposed to be a simple 3-hour hop to Mangalore. The captain has flown into this airport 16 times before, and the first officer has done this 66 times. But tonight, something feels off. The captain stifles a yawn, signals to the stewardess, "Can I get a coffee, please?" He is just back from a 2-week break in Serbia, only returning 2 days ago, and his body clock is completely out of sync. The time zones are still messing with his sleep, and he wasn't even supposed to be flying tonight. It was a last-minute change. Air India Express had called him the previous day and had asked him to switch for a colleague. "Okay, I'll do it." In 2010, Air India Express handled scheduling manually with pen and paper, and these last-minute changes were part of the routine. But these last-minute changes took a toll on the pilots. Sometimes they were fatigued, and their judgment was blurred. If they had a platform like Odoo, things could have looked very different. Odoo is a simple, efficient, and affordable platform that covers all your business needs, from scheduling to project management, inventory, and websites. You can start with just the apps you need and add more as you grow. With the Odoo project application, you get a flexible solution to keep you and your team organized and on top of every detail. Through this comprehensive dashboard, you'll have a complete view of projects with customizable stages and real-time updates. Use the Kanban view to move tasks like sticky notes for a visual pipeline, the Gantt view to see timelines, task dependencies, and schedules, and the list view for an organized overview with batch action capabilities. You can even save and share custom views, giving everyone the information they need in just one click. For seamless collaboration, Odoo centralizes communication by using the chatter within the tasks, allowing you to email, add quick notes, or attach files directly to tasks through log notes, all in one place. With Odoo, your first app is free for life, including unlimited hosting and support. It's a powerful way to manage complex operations, keeping your team organized so that nothing critical slips through the cracks. This story begins on the night of May 21, 2010 at Mangalore International Airport. Here's the plan for tonight. Take off from Mangalore at 9:35 p.m., land in Dubai at 1 a.m., take off from Dubai again at 2:45 a.m., and return to Mangalore by 6:30 a.m. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. A flight so routine you could do it with your eyes closed. The captain is L.C. Gicha, a 55-year-old Serbian national. He is one of a handful of foreign pilots rostered by Air India Express. Next to him in the cockpit is 40-year-old Mumbaikar Harbinder Aluya. In the back with the passengers were 4 other cabin crew members, but they won't play a part in the story today. The aircraft is a Boeing 737-800 equipped with a short-field performance package, allowing it to operate from airports with short runways like the one here at Mangalore. The plane is just under 3 years old, and it was delivered to Air India Express in January of 2008. Tonight's flights are going to happen late in the night, and most of it will occur in the window of circadian low, the hours between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., where fatigue peaks and concentration dips. Air India Express typically conducts pre-flight medical checks for all pilots as required by DGCA, the Indian Aviation authorities. However, there is a problem at Mangalore tonight. Air India Express does not have a medical officer on staff or on contract at Mangalore Airport. meaning no pre-flight medical exams are conducted for flights departing from Mangalore. While DGCA rules mandate medical checks for flight crews, the specific requirements are ambiguous, and they are often interpreted differently by airlines. In this case, the pilots are asked to just self-certify their fitness to fly and no actual medical tests are performed. The plane then departs Mangalore on time and the outbound flight to Dubai is uneventful. After landing in Dubai, the crew has approximately 1 hour and 22 minutes to prepare for the return flight. As this is a quick turnaround flight, there are no pre-flight medical requirements in Dubai. It is assumed that the pilots have already been cleared in Mangalore, but today that assumption is dangerously flawed. And now, as they prepare to take off for the return leg, the question is, are they really fit to fly? On the runway in Dubai, the plane is ready for takeoff. The throttle is pushed forward, the engines roar to life, and the plane lifts off into the night. Its destination is Mangalore. On short flights like this, there is usually no need for support crews. The same two pilots will fly the plane for the entire 3.5-hour journey. But about an hour into this flight, the captain begins to feel tired. The time zone in Serbia, where he has been on holiday, is GMT +2, which means his body clock is 3.5 hours behind. Combined with the disruption to his sleep cycle from constant travel, the captain begins to feel the effects. He leans back in his seat and closes his eyes. Within moments, he drifts into a deep sleep, and the sound of snoring fills the cockpit. Now there's only one functioning pilot left. First Officer Aluya is left to handle both ATC communications and flying the plane single-handedly, a job that's meant for two, now done by one. But if there's one airport where every ounce of focus, precision, and teamwork is crucial, it's Mangalore. Here's why. Mangalore Airport is unusual in many ways. For starters, it sits on a small hill and has what's known as a tabletop runway, a runway surrounded on all sides by steep cliffs. The runway is also narrower. It is only 150 meters wide, as opposed to the standard 300 meters. To make matters worse, the safety area at the end of the runway is poorly maintained and overgrown with vegetation. To make matters worse, the end of runway 24 plunges into a 250-foot drop. An aircraft overrunning here not only risks overrunning the runway, but also the terrifying possibility of a catastrophic fall off the edge of a cliff. As if that weren't enough, Mangalore's area control radar is not working. Normally, the area controller would give descent clearance before handing the aircraft over to the approach controller. But without it, things are about to get messy. Because of the complexity of Mangalore, Air India Express had classified it as a critical airport, which means that only the captain can land there, while the first officer is restricted to monitoring the pilot. This too will play a part in the story. With a difficult approach, a rocky runway, and no radar, Mangalore demands a flight crew that is on top of its game and working together. But in the cockpit of Flight 812, the first officer is doing double duty and the captain is fast asleep. It's 5:33 a.m. The plane is at waypoint AMA. ATC instructs the crew to prepare for an SDME arc approach to runway 24. Okay, so what's a DME arc? During a standard ILS approach, an aircraft aligns with the runway centerline and descends along the glide path in a straight line to the runway. However, if there are obstacles such as hills, mountains, or restricted airspace near the airport, a straight approach may not be possible. In these cases, the aircraft can follow a circular DME approach. At a fixed distance from the airport, the aircraft follows this arc until it can safely intercept the localizer to align with the runway. This method ensures that the aircraft avoids hazards while still guiding it to a safe landing. Here in Mangalore, the Kudak Hills are located to the east of Mangalore Airport, and to avoid them, an arc approach to runway 24 is required. The DME arc approach requires more concentration and skill from the pilot. It's not difficult in itself. Pilots are trained and perform these procedures regularly, but it does require careful attention to detail. This is a good time to remind you that the captain is still asleep and the first officer is doing double duty. About 130 miles from Mangalore, the first officer requests descent clearance. This is where the plane would normally begin its descent, but today the ATC denied this request. Remember, the Mangalore Area Control Radar is not working. Without radar, ATC resorts to a manual system called Standard Procedure Control. They make a mental map of where the planes are, and to ensure safety, they keep the planes further apart than usual, usually 10 to 15 minutes flying time, to make extra sure they stay safe. When an aircraft needs to change altitude, air traffic controllers need to make sure that there is enough space both at the new altitude and at all the altitudes it will pass through as it descends. They therefore prefer to keep aircraft at the same altitude for as long as possible. For this approach, ATC has decided that the right time for the aircraft to start descending is when it is 80 miles away. The aircraft has now reached the 80-mile mark and is cleared to descend. The first officer taps the controls to begin the descent to 7,000 feet. The crew are trained to descend from such short distances. They know the plan. If they stay too high, they must enter a holding pattern to lose altitude. But the planning for this is done during an approach briefing, and this approach briefing, according to Air India Express, has to take place 150 miles from the airport. But with the captain sound asleep, the briefing window is missed. The first officer glances over, sees the captain slumped in his seat, and gently nudges him awake. His voice breaks the silence in the cockpit. "Captain, we are coming in." The captain slowly wakes, groggy and disoriented. Remember, only the captain is allowed to land at Mangalore. The descent has already begun, and there is no time for a full briefing, so they decide to skip the approach briefing. The captain then takes his first of many actions today. He activates the speed brakes in an attempt to reduce speed and accelerate the descent. As the runway approaches, the aircraft is now 25 miles away and at 18,000 feet. Having started their descent later than usual, they are much higher than they should be at this stage. ATC clears them to 2,900 feet. The first officer requests a shorter approach, asking to go directly to the 338 radial and join the 10 DME arc. ATC agrees, but given that they're already well above their ideal descent path, it's puzzling why the first officer would want a shorter route, since a longer distance would have allowed them to descend more smoothly. The pilots have now been on duty for almost 10 hours, pushing through the window of the circadian low. Throughout this period, Captain Glusa remains mostly silent, occasionally yawning or exhaling. Worryingly, the first officer also begins to yawn. Fatigue sets in on both sides of the cockpit. They are ready to land, go home, and get some well-deserved rest. The aircraft reaches the entry point of the 10 DME arc. At this point, you should be at 2,900 feet, but you are at 10,500 feet. They begin to follow the arc. By the time they get to this point, ready to turn right, they should be at 2,200 feet, but they are not. They arrive at this point at an extreme altitude of 6,000 feet. The captain scans his instruments and realizes that they are far too high to lose speed and altitude. He lowers the landing gear and puts the speed brakes on full. But despite his efforts, the plane remains too high. At this height, they won't be able to catch the glide path at all. The glide path will be below them. But strangely, just 2 minutes later, the glide path turns pink. The plane locks onto the localizer and begins to descend towards the runway. But wait, how did this happen? What has happened is that you have picked up the phantom 9-degree glide slope instead of the correct 3-degree glide slope, and this has caused the aircraft to start descending at a terrifying 9-degree angle, almost 3 times the normal. To an alert pilot, the steep angle should have been a clear sign that they were on the wrong path, but this crew completely missed the clues. For a more detailed explanation of the 9-degree bank angle, see the story of Pakistan Airways 8303. The steep angle of approach causes the aircraft to accelerate. At 10 miles from the runway, the captain instructs the first officer, "Give flaps 10 to reduce speed," but they are flying much too fast for flaps 10. The first officer hesitates and asks the captain, "Are you sure?" "Flaps 10 inches?" The captain says yes, and the first officer applies flaps 10. At 7.5 miles, the aircraft should be at 2,000 feet, but they are at 5,000 feet. At 4 miles, they should be at 1,500 feet, but they are at 3,200 feet, more than twice the altitude they should be at. The aircraft continues to descend at a crazy rate. At this point, the crew should have realized that they were too high and initiated a holding pattern to reduce altitude. This would have been part of the approach checklist, which they failed to do. 3 miles from the airport, flaps 40 are selected and the pre-landing checklist is completed. They should have been at 1,200 feet, but they are at 2,800 feet. The descent rate of the aircraft has increased from 1,000 feet per minute to 2,000 feet per minute. The first officer realizes they are not stabilized. "We're too high, Captain." The runway is straight down, but they continue the approach. Upper, climbing. 2 miles from the airport, the captain disengages the autopilot and takes manual control. At this point, they should have gone around. The approach is completely unstable, and at the speed they are approaching, they are in danger of not being able to stop the plane in time given how short the runway is. 1.5 miles away, it's only now that the captain realizes that they've entered the 9th degree glide slope and not the 3rd degree glide slope, the wrong localizer glide path. The cockpit fills with warnings. "Rate of descent! Pull up!" over and over again. The captain ignores them. Oh my God! But still he pushes forward, fixated on landing. A worried first officer suggests again, "Captain, go around. We are unstable." But no, the captain disagrees and overrides the first officer. The first officer doesn't take control because he's not allowed to land in Mangalore. A mile away, the runway is in sight. Now they are still too high, too fast. The captain leans into the descent, pushing the column forward. The plane plunges, now at a terrifying 4,000 feet per minute. Incredibly close to the ground, alarms fill the cockpit. The ground proximity warning system screams, automated calls follow one another, last-ditch pleas for action. But neither pilot heeds them. They push forward, not properly aligned with the ILS path. The captain is caught in a psychological trap known as plan continuation bias, the urge to stick to a plan even when everything screams otherwise. Despite every signal, he's committed, locked into the landing. Up ahead, the runway lights grow larger. In the tower, the ATC radio senses something is wrong. "Express 812, can you confirm established?" Instead of giving an accurate report, the captain instructs the first officer to reply, "Affirmative." With the confirmation, the tower gives clearance and advises, "Express 812, clear to land, winds calm." Even though they were cleared to land, the aircraft was still descending at 4,000 feet per minute. They are at 700 feet instead of the standard 300 feet where they should be. Alarms continue to sound in the cockpit. The plane crosses the runway threshold at 200 feet at a blistering 160 knots, well above the target speed of 144 knots. The plane glides past the touchdown zone, burning precious distance on the short tarmac. The first officer makes one last desperate plea. "Come on, Captain, we've run out of runway." But the captain doesn't pull up. First contact. The right wheel hits the runway 4,500 feet from takeoff. The aircraft bounces, then lands at 5,200 feet. More than half the runway is gone. The situation is dire. They only have 2,800 feet left to stop. The captain's grip on the controls tightens, his eyes fixed on the end of the runway. 10 seconds left. Just 10. The edge of the cliff is approaching. With no margin for error, the auto brake is set at 2. It should have been set to maximum for maximum braking. The captain engages the reverse thrusters and slams on the brakes. The engines engage the reversers, but the aircraft is still hurtling down the runway. Too fast for comfort, too close to the edge. With the edge of the runway rapidly approaching, the captain makes a split-second decision. He stops the reversers and makes one last attempt to go around. He pushes the throttles forward and the engines surge, but it takes a fraction of a second to regain speed, seconds they don't have, and it's too late. They are not fast enough to take off and not slow enough to stop safely. The last-minute extra thrust from the engines wipes out what little braking power they had left. The cliff edge is seconds away. The plane barrels forward and time slows down. The plane enters a poorly maintained razor. The right wing slams into the ILS antenna. "Hang on!" someone shouts. The plane crashes through the boundary fence, a final jolt. The Boeing 737 leaves the ground. The cliff drops away and gravity takes over. The plane falls, the impact. The plane shatters in the canyon, torn apart by the force. Fuel tanks rupture. Flames explode. Smoke fills the air. Debris is strewn across the gorge. The plane broke into 3 pieces. The plane has come to rest about half a kilometer from the perimeter fence. The impact and the fire have completely destroyed the plane. The emergency services are out in force, but the terrain is brutal and they are remote. Minutes tick by. Local villagers, attracted by the crash, arrive on the scene. They become the first responders. With no equipment, no training, and only sheer determination, they sift through the wreckage and pull out survivors. Their actions buy precious time before official crews arrive. But it's a sad scene. Out of 166 souls, only 8 survived. In the aftermath, investigators begin to unravel the disaster. They piece together data, listen to cockpit voice recordings, and discover a haunting truth. If the captain had applied full brakes and held reverse thrust, the plane might have stopped within the overrun. But his last-second decision to try to go around, a move forbidden by the rules, sealed Flight 812's fate. Throttles forward, brakes released, just when they were needed most. The plane is on fire. Mayday, mayday, mayday! The captain has just heard a deafening bang from the cargo hold. Smoke is pouring into the cockpit. Alarms are blaring. Instruments are failing. You are losing control of the aircraft. The ATC is on the phone, helpless. Passengers in the back are screaming. But behind the scenes, something far more dangerous is unfolding. A chain of events that will set off decades of speculation, government cover-ups, conflicting reports, and whispers of something far more sinister